What if one quiet sentence from a little boy could stop an entire courtroom? What if every adult believed they already knew the truth, until a child spoke only a few simple words? No one inside the courtroom expected that morning to be remembered. It looked like another ordinary day. People quietly filled the wooden benches while lawyers organized their papers. The court clerk checked the schedule one last time. A low murmur floated through the room as everyone waited for the next case to begin. At the center of the courtroom sat a small boy named Ethan. He was only 8 years old. His feet barely touched the floor as he sat beside his mother. He wore a clean blue sweater that looked a little too big for him. His hands rested quietly in his lap, holding a small folded piece of paper that no one seemed to notice. Unlike the adults around him, Ethan wasn't nervous. He simply looked around the room with calm, curious eyes. Across the aisle sat his father. His face was tense, and every few seconds he glanced toward his attorney before looking back at the judge's bench. The atmosphere felt heavy. Everyone could sense that something important was about to happen. A moment later, the courtroom doors opened. The judge entered, and everyone immediately stood. After the room settled, the judge reviewed the case file for several silent moments. It appeared to be a family dispute filled with disagreements, missing details, and two adults who each believed they were completely right. The judge looked first at Ethan's mother, then at his father. "I've read the documents," the judge said calmly. "Now I need to hear the truth." One by one, both adults explained their side of the story. Each sounded confident. Each blamed the other. Each insisted they were acting in Ethan's best interest. The little boy remained silent. He never interrupted. He never looked angry. Instead, he quietly unfolded the small piece of paper in his hands and read it again. The judge noticed. "What do you have there, young man?" the judge asked gently. Ethan quickly folded the paper again. "It's just something I wrote." The courtroom smiled. Some people thought it was a drawing. Others assumed it was homework. The judge nodded kindly. "That's fine. You can keep it." The hearing continued. More documents were presented. More arguments filled the room. The adults spoke louder. The tension grew stronger. But through it all, Ethan never took his eyes off the folded paper in his hands. Almost as if he had been waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, after listening to both sides, the judge leaned forward. "Before I make any decision," the judge said, "is there anything else anyone wishes to say?" The courtroom became completely still. For several long seconds. No one moved. Then, Ethan slowly raised his small hand. Every head in the courtroom turned toward him. And no one could have imagined that the simple words he was about to speak would change the entire hearing forever. The courtroom became so quiet that even the sound of a page turning seemed loud. Every pair of eyes was now on Ethan. The little boy kept his hand raised, but he didn't look scared. He simply waited patiently, just as his teacher had taught him at school. The judge looked at him with a gentle smile. "Yes, Ethan," the judge said kindly. "You may speak. Take your time." Before Ethan could say a word, his father's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, he's only 8 years old. I don't think." The judge calmly raised a hand. "I didn't ask for your opinion." The attorney immediately sat down. The room became silent once again. The judge turned back to Ethan. "You wanted to tell us something?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He carefully unfolded the small piece of paper he had been holding all morning. His tiny hands shook just a little. Not because he was afraid. Because he wanted to read every word correctly. "I wrote this by myself," he said quietly. "My teacher helped me spell a few words, but these are my own thoughts." The judge nodded. "Go ahead." Ethan looked down at the paper. Then he looked at his mother. Then at his father. Finally, he looked back at the judge. "I don't want anyone to get into trouble." His soft voice filled the courtroom. "I just want everyone to stop fighting." No one moved. Even the court clerk stopped typing. Ethan continued. "When grown-ups fight, they think kids don't understand." He paused for a moment. "But, we hear everything." His mother slowly lowered her head. His father looked down at the floor. The courtroom remained completely silent. Ethan took another slow breath. "When people ask me who is right," he looked at both of his parents. "I don't know. I only know that when you both argue, I feel like I'm doing something wrong." His words were simple. There were no difficult sentences. No dramatic speech. Just the honest thoughts of a little boy. The judge listened carefully without interrupting. Several people sitting in the gallery quietly wiped tears from their eyes. The attorneys who had been arguing only minutes earlier now sat without saying a word. Ethan folded the paper halfway. "I brought this because I was scared." The judge gently asked, "Scared of what?" Ethan looked down before answering. "Scared that nobody would ask me how I feel." The courtroom became even quieter. The judge leaned forward. "I'm listening now." Ethan gave a small nod. "Thank you." He looked back at his paper. "There's one more thing." He reached into his backpack and carefully removed a small envelope. "I found this a long time ago." He held it with both hands. "I didn't know if it was important." His mother looked confused. His father frowned. Neither of them had seen the envelope before. The judge noticed their reactions immediately. "What is inside?" she asked. Ethan answered honestly. "I've never opened it. My mom told me that things that don't belong to me should stay closed." The judge smiled gently. "That's a very good lesson." She looked toward the court clerk. "Please bring the envelope here." As the clerk carefully walked toward Ethan, every person in the courtroom watched in complete silence. No one knew what was inside. But somehow, everyone felt that this small, unopened envelope was about to change the entire case. The court clerk carefully accepted the small envelope from Ethan. It looked old. The corners were slightly bent, and there was no name written on the front. It had probably been sitting somewhere for a long time. The judge looked at Ethan. "Where did you find this?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "Under the drawer in our hallway." The judge nodded. "And you never opened it?" "No, ma'am. My mom always tells me that if something isn't mine, I shouldn't open it." The judge smiled. That was the right thing to do. She examined the envelope for a few seconds before handing it to the court clerk. "Please open it carefully." The courtroom watched in complete silence. The clerk slowly opened the flap and pulled out several folded sheets of paper. There was also a small photograph. The clerk handed everything to the judge. She quietly began reading. At first, her expression remained calm. Then her eyebrows slowly lifted. She turned to the photograph, looked at it carefully, then returned to the papers. Neither attorney could understand what she was seeing. Finally, Ethan's father's attorney stood. "Your Honor, may we know what those documents are?" The judge looked up. "In a moment." She continued reading every page before placing them neatly on the bench. Then she turned toward both parents. "I have a question." Neither of them spoke. The judge looked first at Ethan's mother. "Have you ever seen these papers before?" She shook her head. "No, Your Honor." The judge then turned toward Ethan's father. "What about you?" He looked surprised. "I've never seen them either." The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked back at the photograph. It showed Ethan several years earlier, smiling between both of his parents during a family picnic. Everyone in the picture looked happy. The judge gently placed the photo beside the papers. "It appears these documents were placed inside this envelope several years ago." The courtroom remained silent. "What kind of documents are they?" one attorney carefully asked. The judge answered calmly. "They appear to be letters." "Letters?" several people quietly whispered. The judge nodded. "Yes. They were written by both parents." The courtroom looked confused. The judge continued. "It seems each parent wrote a private letter to Ethan before this family disagreement ever began." Ethan's mother slowly covered her mouth. I remember writing one." His father looked equally surprised. "So do I." The judge looked at them. "Neither of you remembered where they were kept." Both quietly nodded. The judge held up the first letter. "This letter speaks about kindness." She held up the second. "And this one speaks about honesty." Neither parent said a word. The room felt different now. The argument that had filled the courtroom earlier suddenly seemed much smaller. The judge slowly folded both letters. "I believe these words may help us better understand this family." Just then, the court clerk quietly pointed toward the bottom of the envelope. "Your Honor, I think there's one more item." The judge looked inside. Hidden beneath the letters was a small folded note. Unlike the others, it wasn't written by either parent. The handwriting was much smaller. The judge carefully unfolded it. After reading the very first sentence, she looked directly at Ethan, then back at the note. For the first time that morning, even the judge appeared genuinely surprised. The courtroom waited in complete silence. The judge looked at the small handwritten note again before carefully placing it on the bench. She didn't read it out loud immediately. Instead, she looked at Ethan. "Ethan," she asked gently, "did you write this?" The little boy nodded. "Yes, ma'am." When did you write it? A long time ago. Why did you put it inside the envelope? Ethan looked down at his hands. Because I thought Mom and Dad would find it someday. His answer made the room even quieter. The judge picked up the note once more. May I read it? Ethan gave a small smile. Yes. The judge unfolded the paper and began reading. Dear Mom and Dad. Her voice was calm. If you ever read this, I hope you're smiling together again. The courtroom remained perfectly still. I don't need more toys. I don't need a bigger room. I just want us to laugh like we used to. Ethan's mother lowered her head. A tear slowly rolled down her cheek. His father closed his eyes for a moment. No one interrupted. The judge continued reading. Sometimes I hear you arguing when you think I'm asleep. I cover my ears, but I can still hear your voices. I wish I could fix everything, but I'm just a kid. The judge paused for a moment. Even she seemed touched by the simple words. She looked toward both parents. Did either of you know he felt this way? Neither answered. After several seconds, Ethan's mother quietly whispered, no. His father slowly shook his head. I didn't know. The judge folded the note carefully. This is why courts exist. Not simply to settle disagreements, but to understand the people affected by them. The courtroom listened closely. Then the judge looked back at Ethan. You've been very brave today. Ethan gave a small shrug. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just wanted everyone to know the truth. The judge smiled kindly. And sometimes the truth is very simple. Just then, one of the attorneys stood. Your Honor, may I ask the child one respectful question? The judge looked at Ethan. Only if you're comfortable answering. Ethan nodded. That's okay. The attorney smiled gently. Ethan, if you could ask your parents for one thing today, what would it be? The courtroom leaned forward. Everyone expected him to choose one parent, or ask to live somewhere specific. Instead, Ethan answered without thinking. I don't want anyone to win. The room became silent once again. I just want my parents to stop trying to beat each other. Even the attorneys looked down. Those few words carried more weight than hours of legal arguments. The judge slowly nodded. Then she closed the case file in front of her. I believe we've spent enough time discussing documents. She looked at both parents with a calm but serious expression. Now, I think it's time we discuss something far more important. The courtroom waited. No one knew exactly what the judge was about to do. But everyone could feel. The hearing had completely changed. And the decision she was about to make would surprise every person in the room. The judge folded her hands on the bench and looked quietly at both parents. For a few moments, she didn't speak. The silence itself seemed to carry more weight than anything that had been said so far. Finally, she broke it. I've listened to the legal arguments. I've reviewed the documents. And I've heard from Ethan. She paused. Now I have a question for both of you. Neither parent moved. The judge looked first at Ethan's mother. When was the last time you and Ethan's father sat down together and talked without arguing? She thought for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. I honestly don't remember. The judge nodded. She turned to Ethan's father. And you? He sighed deeply. I don't remember either. The judge leaned back. That tells me more than any document in this courtroom. No one spoke. The judge continued. You both clearly love your son. I don't question that. What concerns me is that you've become so focused on proving each other wrong that you've stopped asking what Ethan actually needs. Those words filled the courtroom with silence. Ethan looked from his mother to his father. Neither of them could meet his eyes. The judge gently picked up Ethan's handwritten note again. I've handled many difficult family cases, she said. I've read thousands of pages of legal documents. But sometimes. She looked toward Ethan. The clearest truth is written in the simplest words. The attorneys quietly lowered their files. Even they seemed to realize this hearing had become about something much bigger than legal arguments. Just then, the court clerk approached the judge and quietly handed her a folder. Your Honor, these are the school records you requested. The judge thanked her and opened the folder. Inside were attendance reports, teacher observations, and several notes from Ethan's elementary school. She carefully read each page. Then she looked up. Ethan's teacher wrote something that I think everyone should hear. She adjusted her glasses and read aloud. Ethan is respectful, hardworking, and kind to every student. Over the past several months, however, he has become much quieter than before. He often worries about whether his parents are okay. During writing assignments, he frequently writes about wishing his family could laugh together again. The room became completely still. Ethan's mother quietly wiped away another tear. His father looked down at his hands. For the first time all morning, neither of them seemed interested in winning. They only looked heartbroken. The judge gently closed the folder. This confirms what Ethan has already told us. She looked directly at both parents. Children don't always ask for expensive gifts. They don't always need perfect answers. But they do need to know the adults they love are listening. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan's father slowly stood up. He wasn't asked to. He simply stood, looking first at the judge, then at Ethan, finally at Ethan's mother. He quietly said, "I think I've spent too much time trying to prove I was right." The courtroom remained silent. A few seconds later, Ethan's mother stood as well. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "So have I." The judge watched them carefully. For the first time since the hearing began, the argument had stopped. But she knew one important decision still remained. And before the day was over, she wanted both parents to understand exactly what that decision would mean for their son's future. The courtroom remained quiet as both parents slowly sat back down. No one rushed to speak. Even the attorneys seemed to understand that this moment was no longer about winning a case. It was about understanding a little boy who had carried a heavy burden far longer than anyone realized. The judge looked at Ethan with a warm smile. "Ethan," she said gently, "you've been very honest today." He nodded. "I tried. I know you did." She paused before asking one final question. "If you could describe your perfect day with your mom and dad, what would it look like?" Ethan thought carefully. He didn't answer right away. He looked at his mother, then at his father. Finally, he smiled a little. "We'd eat pancakes." A few people in the courtroom smiled. Ethan continued. "We'd go to the park. We'd feed the ducks. My dad would tell his funny jokes. My mom would laugh at them even if they weren't funny." A soft laugh spread through the courtroom. For the first time that morning, the room felt lighter. Ethan looked down for a second before speaking again. "And when we got home," he stopped. The judge waited patiently. "What then?" she asked. Ethan looked back up. "I wouldn't have to guess if tomorrow was going to be another bad day." Those simple words erased every smile in the room. The silence returned. His mother quietly covered her face. His father closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The judge slowly nodded. "Thank you, Ethan." She turned toward both parents. "Did either of you hear what your son asked for?" Neither answered. He didn't ask for a new bicycle. He didn't ask for a vacation. He didn't ask the court to choose one parent over the other. She paused. He asked for peace. The courtroom remained completely still. The judge closed the file in front of her. "I have handled family disputes for many years. I've learned that children often say the most important things with the fewest words." She looked directly at both parents. Today, Ethan reminded every adult in this room that children are not keeping score. They're keeping memories. Those words echoed through the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused for a brief moment before continuing to type. The judge leaned forward. "I'm prepared to make my decision." Both parents sat up straight. The attorneys quietly gathered their notes. Ethan simply waited. The judge spoke calmly. "My decision today is based on one principle: the best interests of this child." She explained that both parents would be expected to work together respectfully, communicate honestly, and place Ethan's well-being ahead of their disagreements. She emphasized that the court expected cooperation, not conflict, and that every future decision should focus on giving Ethan a stable and caring environment. Neither parent objected. Neither attorney argued. For the first time all day, everyone seemed to agree. As the judge prepared to conclude the hearing, the court clerk quietly placed one final document on the bench. The judge glanced at it. Then she looked toward Ethan once more. A gentle smile appeared on her face. "There is one last thing I'd like to say before this family leaves." No one knew what she was about to say. But every person in the courtroom leaned forward to listen. The courtroom was completely silent. The judge looked at Ethan with a gentle smile before speaking. "Ethan," she said, "I have spent many years listening to people tell their stories. Adults often bring long explanations, thick folders, and many arguments." She paused for a moment. "But today," she looked around the courtroom, "you reminded all of us that honesty doesn't have to be complicated." Ethan looked down shyly. "I was just telling the truth." "I know," the judge replied. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful thing anyone can say. She then turned toward Ethan's parents. I want both of you to stand. They quietly stood beside one another. There was still sadness on their faces, but the anger that had filled the courtroom earlier had disappeared. The judge spoke calmly. I cannot change the past. I cannot erase the difficult days your family has experienced. But I can remind you of something important. She picked up Ethan's handwritten note one last time. This little piece of paper contains more wisdom than many legal arguments I've heard. She carefully folded it and handed it back to Ethan. Keep this. One day, when you're older, I hope you read it again and remember how brave you were. Ethan smiled. I will. The judge then looked back at his parents. I want you both to make one promise. His mother nodded. So do I, the judge continued. Promise that every decision you make from today forward will begin with one question. She paused. Is this good for Ethan? Not. Is this good for me? Not. Do I win? Only. Is this good for Ethan? His father slowly nodded. I promise. His mother looked at Ethan before answering. So do I, the judge smiled. Good. Just then, something unexpected happened. Ethan reached for both of his parents' hands. For a second, neither of them moved. Then his mother reached out. A moment later, his father did the same. Ethan stood between them, holding one hand from each parent. The courtroom watched quietly. No one applauded. No one spoke. It was a simple moment. But somehow, it felt bigger than the entire hearing. Even the attorneys exchanged small smiles. The court clerk quietly wiped away a tear before returning to her paperwork. The judge leaned back in her chair. This courtroom settles legal disputes. She looked at Ethan. But today, you reminded us that kindness can solve problems the law never could. Ethan smiled again. I just wanted us to be a family. No one in the room forgot those words. As the family prepared to leave, the judge wished them well and reminded them that the work of rebuilding trust would happen outside the courtroom, one day at a time. The hearing was officially over. But just as Ethan reached the courtroom door, someone quietly called his name. He turned around. What the judge said next was something he would remember for the rest of his life. Ethan slowly turned around. His parents stopped beside him. The courtroom, which had almost emptied, became quiet once again. The judge looked at the little boy and smiled warmly. Ethan, she said, would you come here for just a moment? He looked at his mother. She nodded gently. It's okay. Ethan walked back toward the judge's bench. He stood quietly, his hands folded in front of him. The judge leaned forward. I want to thank you. Ethan looked surprised. For what? The judge smiled. For reminding every adult in this room why we are here. Ethan blinked. I didn't do anything special. The judge shook her head. I think you did. She looked around the courtroom. Today, many people came prepared with legal papers. They brought reports. They brought arguments. They brought opinions. She paused. But one little boy brought honesty. The courtroom remained silent. The court clerk smiled. One of the attorneys slowly nodded. The judge continued. You spoke without trying to hurt anyone. You didn't blame your mother. You didn't blame your father. You simply told us how you felt. She looked directly at both parents. That takes courage. Ethan quietly asked, does courage mean you're never scared? The judge smiled. No. Courage means telling the truth even when you're scared. Ethan thought about those words for a moment. Then he smiled. I think I understand. The judge nodded. I believe you do. She reached into the folder on her bench and carefully removed Ethan's handwritten note. I'm giving this back to you. She handed it to him. One day, when you're older, read it again. It will remind you that your kindness helped people stop and listen. Ethan carefully folded the paper and placed it safely inside his backpack. I'll keep it. I hope you do, the judge replied. As Ethan turned to leave, one of the younger attorneys quietly stood up. Your Honor. The judge looked over. May I say something? She nodded. The attorney smiled at Ethan. I've practiced law for almost 10 years. I've listened to hundreds of courtroom arguments. But today, he paused. I learned more from an 8-year-old than I learned in many cases. A few quiet smiles appeared around the room. Even the bailiff gave a small nod. The judge stood from her chair. Before leaving the bench, she spoke one final time. I hope everyone here remembers this day. Not because of the court's decision, but because one child reminded us that listening is just as important as speaking. She looked toward Ethan's parents. Children are always watching. They notice our words. They remember our actions. And sometimes, they carry worries that adults never see. The courtroom doors slowly opened. Families began walking out. The attorneys gathered their files. The court staff returned to their work. Everything looked normal again. But everyone knew something was different. Because long after the paperwork was filed, people would still remember the quiet little boy whose simple words had changed the entire courtroom. And outside those courtroom doors, one final surprise was waiting for Ethan and his family. As Ethan and his parents stepped out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun shined brightly across the front steps. For the first time in a long while, no one was arguing. No one was trying to prove a point. They simply walked together in silence. Ethan held his backpack tightly against his shoulder. Inside was the folded note the judge had returned to him. Somehow, it felt more valuable than anything else he owned. When they reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, Ethan stopped walking. His parents looked at him. "What's wrong?" his mother asked gently. Ethan smiled. "Nothing. I was just thinking." His father smiled for the first time that day. "About what?" Ethan looked at both of them. "Can we get pancakes tomorrow morning?" His parents looked at each other. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then his mother smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea." His father nodded. "I'll be there." Ethan's face lit up with the biggest smile anyone had seen all day. "Really? Really?" they both answered. As they walked toward the parking lot together, a familiar voice called out behind them. "Ethan." They turned around. It was the court clerk. She hurried down the courthouse steps holding a small envelope. "I almost forgot," she said with a smile. "The judge asked me to give this to you after the hearing." Ethan accepted it carefully. "It's for me." "Yes. She said you should open it after you leave." Ethan looked at his parents. His mother nodded. "You can open it." He slowly unfolded the envelope. Inside was a handwritten card. The message was short. "Dear Ethan, never believe your voice is too small to make a difference. Kindness, honesty, and respect can change hearts in ways that arguments never can. Keep being yourself." At the bottom was the judge's signature. Ethan quietly read the message a second time. Then he folded it with great care and placed it beside his own handwritten note inside his backpack. "I'm going to keep these forever," he said. His father smiled. "I think you should." Just then, Ethan noticed something across the street. A small city park. He pointed toward it. "Can we walk there for a little while?" His parents looked at each other again. This time, neither hesitated. "Yes," his mother answered. The three of them crossed the street together. There were children laughing on the playground. Birds circled above the trees. Families sat on benches enjoying the afternoon. Ethan ran ahead for a few steps before turning back. He looked at his parents. They were walking side by side, not talking much. But they weren't arguing either. For Ethan, that was enough. As they disappeared deeper into the park, the courthouse stood quietly behind them. The hearing was over. The paperwork would soon be filed away. But the lesson from that courtroom would stay with everyone who had witnessed it. And one final message would bring the story to a close. Several weeks later, life slowly began to feel different for Ethan and his family. There were still challenges, but there were also more conversations, more shared meals, and fewer arguments. Every Saturday morning, they kept the promise they had made outside the courthouse. They ate pancakes together before spending time at the park. One afternoon, Ethan opened his backpack and found the two folded notes he had carefully saved. He smiled as he read them again. They reminded him that even the smallest voice can make a big difference when it speaks with honesty and kindness. The judge's words had stayed with everyone who was in that courtroom that day. Some remembered the legal decision. Others remembered the quiet silence that followed Ethan's simple sentence. But almost everyone remembered one lesson. Sometimes the strongest voice in a courtroom is not the loudest one, it is the most honest one. This story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. The characters, courtroom events, and situations are imaginary and are not intended to represent real people, real court cases, or actual legal proceedings. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What would you have said if you were Ethan? If you enjoy emotional fictional courtroom stories with powerful lessons and unforgettable endings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.